Hello everybody, welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm the Chief Trendwatcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, a quarterly magazine in Europe, but also a huge LinkedIn group and also a bi-weekly newsletter. And I'm also the architect of the SCM IT Supermap Europe, and we'll talk about briefly later. For now, we have a live 60-minute webinar, and we'll talk about transportation planning with AI. And we do it on a strategic level, and we are going to talk about combination of loading and routing, and also with AI you can do magic things. So welcome to this webinar. You see here me on the left without glasses, and on the right you see Frans van Helden. He is currently EVP of Supply Chain Planning of Ortec, and I will introduce the company later. He has a background in applied mathematics some time ago, and after his university studies he went to Ortec, and he was leading the consultancy side of it. So welcome, Frans.
Well, thanks for having me.
So what is triggering you now? We are living in turbulent times. We'll talk about it later. But what is the fun of working at Ortec and applying what you have learned in applied mathematics?
Well, so I think one of the things that really made a step change in the time when I went to university and now is basically the availability of data with all live operational data that's available from operations on in a real time level, and what you can do with that. That's pretty amazing. And yeah, if you now look at today's global landscape, I would say that's pretty volatile in general. Yeah. And what you also see there, in my consultancy days, it was also a lot about thinking long-term strategies, etc. But in terms of in times of volatility, it also comes down to how you execute. Yeah. And what you're able to actually do. In my current scope, I focus a lot on operational transportation planning systems, and that proximity to the road, to drivers, to trucks, to loading, to unloading, to customers, etc. Yeah, that's really why I really love my job these days.
So we'll talk about it later in the next 60 minutes. So, there's a lot to gain in execution. We'll talk about that later. Some practical things. So this webinar will be recorded, and the PDF will be made available online. So the audience is on mute, but you can ask questions to Frans and myself. So you see on the right-hand side the chat functionality. I don't follow the chat closely, but I will watch the Q&A functionality. That's one below. You see the small text bubble on the right-hand side. So if you have questions to Frans, please use the Q&A functionality on the right-hand side. And if the questions are, relating to the conversation I will be having at that time, I will ask these questions immediately. If not, I will reserve these questions to the end of when we have a Q&A. All right. So after the 60 minutes, we also have an extra 30 minutes of after talk. We will be sitting down at table 1. I will explain briefly how you get there. So that's quite nice. If you have some further questions to talk to Frans or to myself, feel free to join us over there. As of this moment, we'll putting off our camera so you can enlarge your screen, and then you have a better look on the slides. All right. So getting back, like I said, I'm the architect of the SCM IT Supermap. Here you see the IT Supermap of last year, 2024. I'm just in the middle of updating this. That will be available in June. You see all the well-known vendors, ERP, WMS, TMS on his website and on his map. So basically, that's based on input from these vendors. So it's proven implementation of all kind of software, all in supply chain. And yes, Ortec is also on this map. And like you can see here, they are delivering transport planning, network design, and also with forecasting and S&OP. So that's the main field. Frans, if you look at this different kind of service lines, What do you see as having most traction nowadays?
Yeah, so I think so the business I'm currently responsible for is about half of our entire business, which is the transportation planning IT systems, basically. So that has quite a lot of traction. As I said, a lot of our customers recognize the need not only to study and consider multiple options, but also to just really put it in practice. So that's having quite some traction. What you in general see, I think, is a bit of a shift from professional services in that sense to SaaS requests altogether, and basically also with our customers, we're heavily exploring and putting into first use the applications of AI, Gen AI related things. That also creates a lot of traction on all angles, I would say. That's also still out there, basically how that will entirely shape our business altogether, I think. But that topic in itself has a lot of traction, I think.
And look at the name Ortec. So the first two letters, operations research. That's the background of Ortec.
Yes.
So that maybe that's also good to know. And another thing is that you also do a lot of workforce management and optimization kind of applications.
Yes, yeah, and I think that isn't necessarily included in your IT subway map here. But I think actually this workforce management in supply chain in itself is quite an interesting topic because we will get there also with when we're talking about several trends in the market that we see. But I think workforce scarcity also in supply chain roles, so from distribution center employees, but also down to drivers. Employee shortage is really a growing concern for many of our customers. So that's quite an interesting angle there as well.
Yeah. So why are we talking about loading and transport planning at this moment?
Yeah. So I think maybe it is a bit of a example or symptom, so to say, of a bigger challenge. What you see, I think, in supply chains are over the past decade have more and more become like strategic assets of our customers. But what you also see is that these supply chains are typically optimized in silos. And traditionally, routing and loading have been major fields for us because they harness some kind of they contain some kind of intrinsic complexity. So as operations research company, we started off with solving the vehicle routing problem, which is basically still the core of our routing solutions. But what you see so our customers are not just doing routing, they're managing their transportation. And when it comes to managing a transportation, it's not enough basically to just solve routing and then solve loading or vice versa. Or for instance, in the home delivery sphere, first solve the time slotting and then do the routing associated with it. All these silos, they influence each other. And that integration and that data availability also allows for much better integration between all those challenges, and solving them integrally not only yields a slightly better result, because typically, indeed, if you consider more, you can calculate slightly better plans. But on the other way around, if you only do it in series, basically challenges that will arise later on in the chain and basically would require you to reconsider. Typically, there's no time for that, but then basically there's inefficiencies and basically mistakes that are incurred by, for instance, the loading that then needs to be repaired in the routing. And typically that repairing of inefficiencies is so much more expensive than having slightly more room, slightly more robustness, slightly more resilience in your planning in the first go.
Talking about inefficiencies, I think there are a lot of inefficiencies still, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah. So there's a ton of inefficiencies, and I don't think my pretension is also not that we're able to solve all those, and I also don't think that's a useful striving, so to say. I think what you see logistics, as soon as it hits operations and it hits the execution phase, it becomes just messy because of the nature of it. For instance, and that's why we wanted to talk about routing and loading together. For instance, in the loading estimate of a truck, there was estimated to be 20 rolling carts, but it turned out that the loading team created 21 or 22 out of them. If your truck has a 20 roll cart capacity, these 1 or 2 additional roll carts will need to be delivered still. So what you then see in the practicality, these drivers will sort it out because they're also professionals. They will get the job done, and what they will do is they will say, hey, well, this doesn't fit in my truck. Can you take it and deliver to these customers? And they do it at the best they can. But that kind of repairing things that are basically over optimized, so to say, from a planning perspective, that typically is very expensive. So if you here, for instance, look at some of the market insights.
Yeah.
So for instance, on the packing and loading, the 17x damaged goods result in 17 times higher shipping cost than first time right. I think that's symptomatic of what you see.
Yeah.
Doing it first time right is so much more cheaper. That's not 2% cheaper or so, but it's 17 times cheaper to do it first time right than fixing it afterwards. And what you sometimes see is that if you do it in silos, for your individual silo, it's optimized, but then you don't leave the room to be resilient for other challenge that you will see anyhow.
Yeah. And still, with the loading capacities, still a lot of trucks are driving either empty or half full. So there's also a lot to gain over there.
Yes. Yeah, and that's, I think, the point in why you should address it in an integrated way is is that you basically can use that spare capacity also to create a higher resilience on the routing. So if you need to repair, then typically if you have to do a catch-up delivery, basically, then typically your truck is driving there completely underutilized. So actually the low utilized trucks actually caused by overestimating what you can do in the from the route perspective, if that makes a bit of sense. Yeah. So considering all these things in their balance, so to say, and not squeezing one element while leaving a lot of other room, but leaving enough room on all different elements to also allow the execution team to repair for mistakes or things that just happen. So maybe to give an example of the things that just happen, about 3 months ago, we were actually one of our team members was participating in a route done by a retail home delivery company, and somehow there was an issue with the battery. So it was an electric truck, and on about 2/3 of the route, the truck got stuck, so the battery was dead. So then another truck had to drive up to that same spot, switch the groceries from one truck to the other, and then finish the route. And then the initial truck itself was towed away. And we saw that basically during a kind of a test run on our new planning system. Well, our planning system didn't cater for that issue altogether. Well, of course, it supported the rerouting of the other truck, but this kind of stuff, there's always something happening. I think we also all know the demo effect. As soon as you show something, it goes wrong, right? Yeah. And it's a bit of Murphy's Law in those kind of cases. And the towing and overhauling those groceries into that other truck, that was just so much more expensive than if battery capacity would have been taken into proper account. Yeah. Just as an example.
And if you look at it, transport planning and route optimization, it's not just for the carrier. I see lately more and more the cargo owners or the brand owners are also more into implementing this transport management systems, because they want to be sure that the delivery will be up to their standards. So it's not just
Exactly.
only for the carriers, the 3PL company, logistics service companies. Also, the owners are on top of this kind of implementations.
Yeah, so and that's so especially in the B2C market, but also in the B2B market, I think those markets behave slightly differently in that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But in the B2C market, with more and more online shopping, basically the truck delivering your order to your home is actually like the checkout of the store, right?
Yeah.
So that needs to be of top quality. So if you look at what companies are looking for also in terms of what are we trying to optimize for. So as Ortec, for the first 30 years of our existence, I think 90% of our projects were focused on achieving savings or driving down cost.
Yeah.
I think over the past 10 years, we've developed this thinking, cost remains a major element to it. And sometimes also the cost itself is just paying for the rest of the projects in that sense. But customer satisfaction, driver happiness, environmental impact are also major parts of the puzzle. And sometimes what you see, for instance, that companies are trying to achieve first a cost saving so that the project becomes self-supportive in terms of ROI,
Yep.
but their actual goal is one of the other three elements.
And on the broader scope, what do you see as the main logistic challenges? There's a whole bunch here, but what do you see are the most dominant ones?
So I think the personnel needed is actually quite a challenging one. We already discussed it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the different load carriers, but also the different carriers themselves. So what you also see is that fleets are becoming much more diversified.
Yeah.
I think for customer satisfaction, for sure, the on-time delivery is a big thing.
Yeah.
And that also ripples through the entire operation. Basically, when you start to be off, you will be more off later on in the entire game. So that on-time delivery is also a big driver for customer satisfaction. So that's a major one. And if you just look at cost savings but also of course customer satisfaction, this reduction of damaged goods is a major one as well.
Yeah. And if you talk about this, because I can imagine companies like you mentioned, they are first want to lower cost and reduce cost to make it happen and to have the ROI quickly. So what do you see as the major routes to get there?
Well, I think the first insight that you need is that it will not be like a single step to make this to make that thing in one go.
Yeah.
What you see still is that our customers and the companies that we work with still have a big issue with data and data cleaning. Data that was accurate 2 years ago, but then the entire customer base renewed itself, and the data is off by now, and that's constant data gathering basically from operations is a major challenge. So getting your data up to par is typically a big first step. Mm-hmm. And I think what we're also more and more incorporating here is with the use of AI is actually learning from actual deliveries in the past. What are the most likely, for instance, time delivery windows for individual customers, or what apparently, given operations, what are apparently the speeds that you can actually achieve on certain road segments, or what apparently loading and unloading times are at customers for all kind of different reasons, where traditionally those are more statically modeled items. You see them becoming more and more dynamic and rooted in actual operations.
And I see also, with the loading and unloading, when a truck is driving up to a yard, It totally depends on the receiving end, which company and how have they organized all this, and that will lead to a long or a short waiting time. And
Yes.
and even
Yeah.
now you see now in the trucks there's more data available from the trucks itself, so you can measure what is the average time waiting time spending at the dock.
Yeah. But for instance, also what you see, and that's more so in business to business delivery.
Yeah.
Also, customers don't accept all drivers basically on their yards per se. So driver familiarity, as we call it, is a major challenge there, because also then if
Yeah.
another driver is covering for a driver that's out or on holidays or sick, or you need to know in advance basically, like, hey, what kind of education, so to say, does this driver need to be accepted in that yard? And actually, when you have multiple drivers that are accepted at such a yard, that also adds again for more flexibility and therefore more optimization opportunity in the routing and loading space itself.
Yeah. If you look at this, each step, you mentioned, you have to have steps that are big enough to be worthwhile, to have an ROI. Otherwise, not too big that they will lead to unachievable. Should you have your ROI on each step? Or is it what you measure and propose?
Yeah, so I think indeed the value of our solutions, our software also increases actually by each step, and I think a lot of our customers are already seeing even a value by just using our solutions as basically automation of manual processes. Not only because of the less time that they need, but also because it forces them basically to have their data to be accurate, and have also the processes being less dependent on individuals, let's say. And what you see is that actually the value then increases as soon as you can start using more OR and AI related solutions to really come up with better suggestions on how to differently route things, to how to differently load things, to present users with alternatives. Also, because that then typically frees up like mental capacity, I would say, from just making sure that everything gets out of the door. Yeah, if that's secured by using a system that makes your life easier, basically, you have also more time to think about, okay, but how do I spread, for instance, my orders between my different fleets? So what you also see a lot, I think, is that it's not just own fleet anymore. It's also typically managing different carriers. And as soon as you have your own operations under control, you also have more mind space available to connect with other internal teams like customer service, sales, and beyond that, even also with carriers, your partners, etc. But then you're really getting towards the right end of the scale. But I think typically when you're starting, it's about making sure that everything gets out of the door, and beyond that, it gets more about, but also get it out of the door the way you want to be, the way your strategy is, the way you want your customers to perceive you, and then also to basically connect that to your value proposition and the way you manage your suppliers.
If you look at the right hand side, you are on the level 5 or 4 on the maturity level. When you combine in and outbound logistics and you have drop shipments, then you are probably in the area of the 5th or the 4th maturity
Yeah,
level.
if that's all seamless, yes, for sure.
Yeah, right. And how much, in percentage, how much of your customers are already on this level 4 and 5?
And that's a good question. I think if you think about the maturity model in itself, always somehow they tend to be that a lot of people who self-assess them on such a maturity model, they recognize them in point 2 or 3, and nobody ever gets beyond point 4. So I think that's somehow the curse of maturity models altogether. But I think some of our retail customers could rightly say they are in 4 or 5. I think that holds for 10-20% of our customer base. I think what I've also seen is customers would say, hey, I'm in number 3 because I'm working on some of the key actions there, but they have still stuff to solve from stage 1. And that's also what you see quite a lot. But I think almost obviously the majority is, I think, in stage 2 and 3, more or less. And with the explicit ambition to grow to 4.
Maybe there's a overall target, an overall optimum. So maybe you can explain this slide.
Yeah. So this is to what I mentioned already before, right? I think traditionally supply chain optimization has been a lot about driving down cost. So a lot of companies have considered themselves to be either a product leadership company or like a very sales oriented company, and typically resulting into a customer intimacy focus. I think over the past 10 years or so, supply chain also has developed into a much more strategic tool in becoming the company that you want to be. And that also means that those kind of positioning questions also translated to supply chain, and how that then translate to the transportation management side of things is that, well, traditionally squeezing cost, of course, focuses really on the cost of delivery. I think in transportation, it's also obvious. Transportation itself is the big cost driver. It's also the biggest footprint driver. So cost of delivery and environmental impact are closely connected. If you're very successful on one end, then you're probably also successful on the other. I think in what you've seen developing much more over the past, well, as I said, 10 years, is that recognition that delivery is also like your face to the customer. So that actually, to be a successful company, you also need to measure customer satisfaction as being part of the equation. So you can be cheap, but you also should be on time, and your product should be in full. And this driver familiarity, for instance, if that's important to your customers because of the nature of your business, having a driver that they recognize or that they trust really is helpful as well. And we discussed quickly about it in the market trends as well. Employees are we're getting into a shortage of employees. What you also see is that only a very small portion of the drivers is under 25 or under 30. That also means that if you lose a driver because they are better treated somewhere else, it's very hard to find a new one. And that driver happiness and making routes that make them feel valued, giving them customers that they like to get to, making orders that make sense in their perspective as well, that they're well supported by the planners if something breaks down or when they hit into traffic all of a sudden. Those elements come into play as well. And what you see, so that's typically also a discussion we have very early on with our customers in our projects, is like, hey, out of these 4, what defines a good plan for you? So what's the one thing that you really want to excel at? And that typically then leads into a discussion on how to tune the system so that it actually supports the strategy.
If I look at this graph, if you go to the north, cost of delivery, I think that's typically the area of operational excellence, like action. If you go to the east, that's customer satisfaction. That's more customer intimacy as a strategy.
Yeah.
going to the west. That's environmental impact. That's the area of product leadership. So do you have customers in all area?
Yes. Yeah. So maybe to name some examples, I think environmental impact, for instance, one of our Norwegian customers, Norges Groepen or ASCO, they're really forward also in electric fleet, for instance. They really focus on that environmental impact. I think indeed some of the cost leaders that you mentioned, or for instance, I think one of our UK-based companies, Sainsbury's, for instance, they're really focused on getting that cost of delivery as low as possible. In customer satisfaction, for instance, we work with Australia's biggest grocery retailer, Woolies or Woolworths. They're really focusing on that customer satisfaction, making sure that they can offer the time slots that their customers need, etc. And basically for all of them, that driver happiness and is actually a major thing in getting the system implemented. Because if their drivers don't want to execute it or don't, they just on the road just don't execute it, yeah, then also your project fails.
If you look at the whole environment of planning and execution, I think in what area are we focusing now?
Yeah, so I think so traditionally, I think our company is rooted in the whole planning. So maybe some of you actually remember our distant slogan of professionals in planning. That was our slogan 10 years ago or so. I think that says it all in that sense. However, what we also see is that all that planning is fine and well, but if you cannot make it to execution, it also doesn't make too much sense. So basically, we use this graph to lay out our entire vision on how you should do this. What we're talking about right now in this webinar is about making a next step in the planning phase. But our solution also comprises of the execution part, then the monitoring to make sure that you understand what is happening and why it was happening. That also offers a basis for reflection then in the improve step, as we call it. Then typically on that entire reflection, you're also trying to predict again, okay, what will we then need to cater for in the future? And then that preparing is what traditionally is called more tactical planning, like visit day optimization or master route optimization, those kind of things. Basically, the shaping the context in which the operational planning is then happening again.
If I look at the prepare environment, you see, lately a lot of mergers and acquisition, and I can imagine that you have to merge two companies, then you have different kind of territories. That's the field where you talk about in that area.
Yeah. So yes, and so in my past at Ortec, I've also been product manager myself on the network design piece, and I think it doesn't do, for instance, things like network design justice to just label them as preparing for the operational transportation planning.
No.
But on the other hand, I think in that prepare step related to transportation planning, for instance, customer allocation or dynamic customer allocation, that is typically our outtakes also of network design things that then, to be really successful, should be implemented on a much more regular basis. Because I think in, for instance, customer allocation, visit day optimization, that is typically done on a weekly scope or a weekly or a monthly, where network design traditionally, unfortunately, is more done on an annual basis. But it has quite some similarities, what you see in this prepare phase. But when talking about network design, what you typically see is that there is a lot of time needed to gather all data.
Yep.
Because you're building it into this loop, when you build it into this loop, basically what you can do is learn from the things that you execute and use it straight away again in your preparation.
If you look at now the detailed part on the right hand side of the helix, so what are the different kind of steps we have to go through?
So typically what you go through is first plan all the loads, and also questions like, do I have a single stop, or is the load so big that it requires a single truck, or should I switch to less than truckload? Then typically the less than truckload, of course, also requires less or a more complex route planning. Then you also should plan the loads on the pallet itself, and that is then typically sent to picking, and that's basically also where the execution starts. So typically for us, also the planning sequence ends there, and then the execution phase starts. And for us, this execution and monitor, we now depicted in a sequence, but I think those are really intertwined. So typically, this monitoring also allows for changes during the entire sequence.
So there's a question from the audience. We have AI in the title. When is AI coming into play? And maybe you can explain it here. I can imagine that, and we'll talk about AI right after this. But is here already AI applicable? If so, where?
So it is actually happening on quite a lot of different levels and elements, so to say. Mm-hmm. So maybe to start with the last one, we are currently wrapping up a prototype of. So we in our solutions we gather all data basically that all planners and the execution generates. We're storing that basically in a big data lake. Mm-hmm. And what we did is that we actually trained a localized installed LLM that allows us to interact with that vast load of data. And why it's fast is basically because every thing that the planner actually does in that system, or every changeover that's made is being stored in there. So it's not only the part that you executed, but also all other options that were considered. Mm-hmm. And actually that hooking up that LLM with that data lake now allows you to basically query your data lake for insight. So for instance, with the questions, can you what are the top 3 questions that I should ask myself to improve on our performance and on-time delivery in April? Those are questions that typically require the kind of a planning analyst, basically, and that are now facilitated through such an LLM. But I think this is one of the examples I think we can all think about. Hey, this is what an application of ChatGPT looks at in logistics. But actually, for instance, in the routing itself, the calculation of travel times from customer A to customer B that's then need to be considered when planning the routing. That's also not a given anymore. That's actually learned from the basic data that we have, of course, from our map providers, but that's then also enhanced with data that you learn actually from operations. There's a machine learning algorithm underlying that and saying, well, this is probably what's going to happen given my observations.
And by the way, the original route planning, that's the traveling sales person problem. That's in itself is already AI with algorithms and heuristics.
Yeah. So actually, within Ortec, 10 years ago or so, when analytics and AI first came to be in the mainstream thinking, so to say, we actually had a debate we could only have at our company, I guess, for quite some time about whether what we were doing was already AI or not. And that debate is still out there. I think indeed what we're doing is traditionally is indeed algorithms. You could label it as AI, but it's a bit cheating it, because what's currently happening with AI and Gen AI is really beyond what we have been doing so far. But what you see indeed that this mixture of things. So I think AI is typically much more about learning and predicting, and OR, or basically starting grounds or operations research, is much more about given data, what's then the optimum, and combining the two yields just better results.
Talking about the starting point of the topic of this webinar, routing and loading optimization. To what extent is that a constraint? So and how can you measure that you are getting better at it?
Yeah, so in the end, that's about having some end KPI or KPIs that measure the results, right? So that's about the cost per delivery, the drops per hour. Basically, you should measure it in execution, because before that, it's just complicated stuff. But if it doesn't make a difference in those kind of the cost of delivery, the drops per hour, the mileage per drop, those kind of typical KPIs, if it doesn't impact those, then we're also not adding any value, right?
Yeah. And zooming into planning. So give an example here. You see an environment. So what is the main attention here?
Yeah. So I think one of the most one of the things where what people might overlook is that there's actually still a lot of progression on this vehicle routing problem. So we started solving it 40 years ago. The algorithms themselves have become much faster, but also much better just in finding an optimum over the past 40 years. And for instance, on the shortest path algorithms, also there we've become much faster, and then we're talking like 10,000 times faster in those years, which also allows for much more consideration, much more scenarios being generated at the back end, offering you with some alternatives. What you see right now is also that because of that, you can also do the route planning much closer to execution while there is still orders coming in. And I think that's one of the topics that we're also still heavily researching. Basically, how should you basically lay out a kind of master routes that still offer enough space and flexibility to add more orders that are still coming in to that route, without foregoing too much the efficiencies that you have because if you would know all deliveries that you have to do, you can calculate. You can do the best calculation.
What I see looking at this map, I know one major highway in the Netherlands next week will be closed off the whole week. There will have a lot of traffic jams, and the planners, using your stuff, or all the transport planners should already, have some backup plans or some alternatives ready, I think.
Yes. Yeah. So in that, then will also be indeed a change to that map for a while, and that it will be blocked, or that should be shown in the data indeed.
But because it will be blocked, some planners will use another route. But if this other routes will be overused, you should have also a plan C and D even.
Yes. Yeah. And I think also all there you could also project whatever you want. I think it also then comes down, and that I think where's the point of end-to-end visibility alludes to. There it also comes down to keeping visibility on how things evolve during the day, and then being able to replan, reschedule, because I think what we've seen in the Netherlands, but also in many other people also start behaving strangely when they know that that heavy traffic is coming up. On the predicted busiest days, all people all of a sudden stay at home to avoid hitting traffic, and then there's no traffic at all. So that's also that strange dynamic. Why it's also important to keep that link basically between the planning, but also being able to follow that all the way down to execution and steer still in that execution phase.
And for the driver, you see the AI-driven personalized voice assistant. So that's also relatively new, I think.
Yeah. So what you see, and that's for instance also a thing even more so in the United States than in Europe. In the United States, companies are going a very long way to ensure driver safety, all for the right reasons, of course. But what you also see there is that literally, and I don't even think that's really allowed in Europe, but that drivers are filmed throughout their trip with a camera on their dashboard to make sure that they keep their eyes on the road. And as soon as they're taking their eyes off the road, for instance, to look at their phone on what the next delivery will be, or on their logistics display, this system signals that. And then a personal voice assistant indeed is very helpful, because basically it can help you to focus on keeping that focus on the road. It can tell you what your next delivery will be, who it is, what you need to unload there, directions, things that the planner noted for you in your driver instructions. And what you also see then is that kind of data and interaction with that device is also then used typically in the driver debrief. These are also all things that are AI powered to some extent.
And going over to the loading, I think a lot of trucks are driving either not fully loaded or even empty. So what are you offering in this area?
So basically, this is loading optimization is about a big 3D puzzle, so to say, and our solution is capable of doing that 3D puzzle just very well, including all kind of complex combinations, like putting things inside of other things or putting things on top of other things, but then to the extent that it's allowed. But that 3D loading puzzle is just very complicated, and it is also not only about can I get it fit into the truck, but also, for instance, how does it balance if all your loads on your left side, your axle weight is not in balance, and that's an issue in itself. But also the loading, of course, should fit with the delivery sequence in less than truckload things, because if the driver needs to shift a lot of its goods around just to unload something, that introduces time that it takes, but it also introduces risk of damage, basically.
And also in the beverage environment, you have a lot of side loading. That's also another complicating factor.
Yes, yeah, indeed. And because then still you want to be, if the delivery is early on in the route, you still want it to as far to the back as possible. And this side loading indeed is a bit of a specialized feature that you mostly see in beverages.
Yeah, but when I look at this, and I speak to a lot of companies doing transfer planning, this is very nice, but I think that probably the biggest challenge in this environment is having the right data of all your packages and your pallets and your loading goods.
Yeah, and that's true. I think this dimension data is hard to come by in some businesses. In some businesses, it's easier, but in some others, it's really complicated. Also what you see there is that for some of our customers, also their AI is playing actually a role in terms of image recognition and being able to estimate dimensions on the basis of a picture rather than having to go through all your master data.
Yeah. And I think, I predict that in the near future, there will be way more data on that level to apply this load optimization in a 3D environment.
Yes. Yeah.
And putting these things together, load optimization and route planning, we'll talk about other ways, but I think that the collaboration part is another dimension.
Yeah, indeed. So as I mentioned already, you see more and more what we call mixed fleets. So where companies have their own fleet, but also have some carriers doing some deliveries for them, and then also basically the trick sometimes is to do the efficient route yourself and then to give more inconvenient deliveries to a carrier, for instance, and do the whole tendering there. And basically then, yeah, you're becoming a transportation partner party yourself, but you also need to manage your carriers in that sense. And also there you see different options. You have some companies who want to manage all themselves and basically have the carrier just execute it as if they were completely part of the company themselves. You also have to say, well, yeah, this is the part I don't want to do myself, so you go and do it in the best way you can. Also there you see all the dynamics you would expect in the market, I would say, you see happening there.
Yeah, and it also getting back, it depends on your business strategy. Do you want to have close contact with your customer with your deliveries, or is it not so important? That's also a major part of it.
Yes.
Summing up, what are the benefits and how do you calculate your ROI?
Yeah, so I think the most traditional benefit is those lower costs, and dependent on the maturity that you're able to achieve, we see 5 to 15% savings in time, resources, mileage, or basically also being able to grow 10% in volume without adding transportation capacity. That's a big thing in terms of the cost itself. Less damaged goods. Especially on the loading side, is a major one because replacing such a damaged good is so expensive. The increased delivery capacity is, of course, intertwined also with the improved sustainability. 10 to 20% fewer empty miles. What you also see is currently we're also some customers were introducing a new product in the market really focused just on the visibility, and that in itself, that sense of a complete control, really seeing where what is, even if it's a carrier, that also creates a kind of ease of mind that's highly appreciated with our customers, and then also that all that increased control also then results in increased satisfaction with customers.
Do you have overall data or specific data on your current user base that can use for calculation for new prospects?
Well, there we have to be a bit careful. So we don't use data from one customer to make the life of another customer better. In that sense, we're not a data broker in itself. But of course, what we are doing is, we're learning from each customer that we work with to come up with new logistic best practices that we then build into our software. And of course,
I mean, rule of thumb. What are the savings and what is the capacity increase? That kind of figures. I can.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I think like basic implementations of routing or loading itself typically already delivers this 5% savings. When you do it in an integrated way, it delivers the combination of that plus a little bit more in general. And what you also see is that, as I mentioned, because of the implementation of such a structured system, and resulted also in process improvements itself within those customers, yielding better data, that typically also delivers quite some value already. That first part of value is typically harder to measure because that then the baseline is not entirely clear, and overall that remains to be a problem to really measure it down to the exact bit, because typically also market circumstances evolve a little bit, and then baselining and really pinning the exact value down is hard. But 5 to start with, 10 if you go really more advanced, especially when and also things like merger and acquisitions come into play, then you're easily playing double digits.
Yeah. Okay. So why should you combine the routing and the loading optimization?
So for me, the biggest value is basically because your routing and loading in themselves are really complex. And because of that, typically, if you just estimate the other one when doing the one, for instance, estimating the loading while you're doing the routing, leaves you at big risk of overestimating the capacity of your truck, and having that puts you at a lot of risk, basically, of leaving a lot of value at the table or having to do a recovery later on. So by tackling them in one go, you tackle the biggest drivers of complexity in logistics in one go, and therefore leaving you a lot less exposed, basically, to unforeseen disruptions, I'd say.
Yeah. If I look at from a distance, I see, because of the calculation power, the computational power nowadays, it's doable, to combine this with 3D optimization and loading, and the all kind of complex transport planning and route planning is now doable because of the calculation power.
Well, I think that would suggest that you're able to brute force it, but the intrinsic complexity of both routing and loading challenges, that still leaves it very complex to deliver the optimum, even with all calculation power at your disposal.
Yeah.
I think, though, with all that data, you're much easier, basically, in getting into an initial feasible solution already. Yeah. I think that's true. I think then basically, and I think that's also a bit of a paradigm shift, so to say, over the past 10 years. I think 10 years ago, there was a lot of ivory tower kind of calculations going on. Well, that when they hit the field, it had to see to what extent they survive. And I think that's where you also see this role of AI, but also actually the paradigm behind AI. Just start learning from what is happening already today, and then see how you can incrementally improve on that. And I think our OR background basically makes sure that we don't need to stop with incrementally improving until we find the true optimum, I think. And because of the routing and loading being those big complexity drivers, we tackle them in our solution, and therefore we have the best shot of making it to the true optimum that's still executionally feasible to execute.
So we're getting almost to the end of the webinar, and right after this we have the Q&A. But this is the planning and execution helix,
Yes.
and we'll discuss this earlier. Maybe there's a question from the audience. In which area, loading, routing, planning, will AI contribute most, and where should smaller companies start using it?
I think it's for smaller companies. I would say, for me, AI is really a means to an end, in that sense. And I think where you should start, but that's basically back to the Helix picture, where you should start is basically making sure that you have visibility on what is driving around. And then AI can help you start making suggestions in the planning phase about doing things slightly different than what you're used to. And I think that those first incremental changes basically to how you're used to do things are the most valuable things to start with as a smaller company. Because let's be honest, both planners and drivers that you all use currently, they're all professionals. And especially when you're a smaller logistics company, it's extremely hard for an algorithm to beat an experienced planner, especially when the company is smaller. But then using the AI to actually assist the planner and taking over tedious work in terms of data manipulation and order sequencing, etc. That's where the value is, so that basically the planner frees up time that it takes, that doesn't use his or her special powers, let's say. That's where then the actual value is.
I think
So I think,
what is the most time consuming for your current employees. That's where to look at.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I think more and more we should think about AI as basically being a bit of, this may be a bit dangerous to say, but a bit of like a junior planner, like a planning assistant, so to say, that can draft 80% of your route given on what they typically already saw you doing, so that you can start improving on it. And then in the routing and loading optimization algorithms, there's actually AI related methodologies in there already. And then we're talking about the learning of execution and the learning of data patterns, etc. But I think that thinking about that assistance use case, let's say, is the easiest way to start with.
Right. We're getting out of time, but the good news is we have an extra 30 minutes if you want to join us at the table. We'll be sitting at table 1. There's some further information, and you will be able to download this PDF. There's a link to the IT supply map. There's also a mind map we have created together with Ortec about food and beverage distribution, with the different steps you have to go through in that area. And on the website, there's way more cases than just this one. This is about Albert Heijn's dynamic time slot booking. Very interesting to see what they are doing on a dynamic environment. Like I mentioned, Ortec has different kind of options in planning, routing, workforce, and analytics. So you will see it at their website. And this is a cool wrap up, what they are doing. They're optimizing a lot. And that's what we want to get across. So the audience, thank you for listening in. Thank you for having these questions. I hope you like it if you're watching live or either the recording. And Frans, thank you for your explanation. And thinking it's very interesting to see what you're heading to. And I think there's a lot of value in this combination of loading and route optimization. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And back again, we'll be right after this in the virtual lounge for an extra 30 minutes to discuss more topics. If not, I'll hope to see you next time in another webinar. And thanks for now, and bye-bye.